It doesn't take a genius to spend 10 seconds on YouTube Kids and see that there are problems. You look closely at some specific things. What are the problems that you saw?
Yeah, and the problems in this case, I mean, YouTube has been dealing with problems about sort of the more outlandish and sort of potentially dangerous videos. These are the mainstream videos. These are the most popular video stars. And right now, we're not accusing them. They're not doing anything wrong, right? YouTube has built this system where it's very successful to them to be incredibly engaging, to be very, unboxing videos are the perfect case, right? These are where kids are unboxing a toy. They're often, even if the company has or has not paid for it, it's not clear. There are groups that saying like children under 6 are very impressionable. YouTube's claim right now is that no one under 13 should be using its site.
So hang on, because that is just so disingenuous, because if you can search for Paw Patrol, Peppa Pig, many, many videos that kids over 13 would not watch, and there is plenty of content.
Right, and that's why it's a really interesting business story, because YouTube, these unboxing stars are homegrown, right? They're not Disney at the moment. They're not other large companies that are building streaming services. And so YouTube has them, and so in one way really wants to promote them. They're a key driver of their growth. At the same time, they're getting to a lot of regulatory issues. They have YouTube Kids, which is an app that's designed for children under 13. We've heard people in this space talk about that. A lot of the content is made for toddlers. It's not necessarily for 8 to 12-year-olds. The major issue here is we reported in the story they have around 18 million monthly active subscribers, which for YouTube, which is 2 billion people worldwide, is just too small. And for Google, historically, that's been something that's not big enough to keep sustaining. So they're at a real inflection point about what they're going to do with kids' content.
Doug, what percentage of YouTube's revenue do you think comes from YouTube Kids?
Yeah, we think kids' content overall, so including the app, is probably around 5% of total revenue, and we think that YouTube did somewhere between $10 and $15 billion in revenue last year. So we're talking about probably a $500 to $750 million a year business advertising alongside of these kids' content products.
So we're watching a video here by Jojo Siwa, who's a famous Kidfluencer, and Mark, it was actually some of her videos that you found to be problematic.
So these were groups that have complained to the FTC about Google that point to this, and she's a really interesting test case here. She has a video where she goes to Target, she goes to Walmart, she has clothing line there, she's shopping there. I was told that if this were Nickelodeon on children's broadcast, the FTC would say that's an ad. And you can't have more than 12 minutes of advertising for every hour of programming. On YouTube, it's fine. Target said they didn't pay for this video. It's sort of this new, weird version of sponsored content and promotional. Some groups are arguing it crosses a moral line, and they're arguing for the FTC and Congress to say that there's a regulatory line there that they should impose.
So hang on, though. After you contacted YouTube, they actually pulled one of her videos down, right?
There was a separate video that wasn't from her main channel. And that video, they said, violates their rules about product listing. I think part of the issue here in talking to a lot of YouTube creators and people in the industry is it's not super clear, right? The rules are constantly changing. YouTube has, with a lot of its problems historically, kind of redrawn the line in the sand as they're still adjusting to strong policies. And they have, in their defense, tens of thousands of creators, and it's really hard to communicate them. This is both the benefit and the downside of their business model, right? Is they have thousands of users out there, and they can't tame them all.
So, Doug, traditional television has been regulated for years, and YouTube has avoided almost any regulation. I mean, do you think that there's a serious threat of regulation, and could that dent the business?
I think right now there's probably not a real serious threat. What we're seeing, though, is there's a really blurry line between what is native and what is sponsored. And I think part of the issue is that this kind of world of influencers we now live in, they themselves are their brand. And when you are your brand, everything is native and everything is sponsored, is sort of the ironic thing. And so I think as these influencers build businesses on their brands, you take someone like a Kylie Jenner with Kylie Cosmetics, it's an $800 million business now. So there's huge value in personal branding. And I think as we see more success in that, it'll be even more difficult to separate what is native and what is sponsored.
Right, and the whole goal with advertising is to make it seem, like you're not watching an ad. You want the ad to look as native as possible. Now, YouTube did give us a statement for your story saying YouTube content creators are responsible for ensuring their content complies with local laws, regulations, and YouTube community guidelines, including paid product placements. If content is found to violate these policies, we take action, which can include removing content. It's just once again blaming somebody else. How can they trust that content creators are going to abide by the rules.
I mean, and to the larger point about regulation, I mean, the FTC did come down on Musical.ly, an app that was $5.7 million fine. This morning, Google was fined nearly $2 billion by the European Union. It had no effect on the market, virtually no effect. Google is almost immune. The sort of curse they have, but it's also their greatest strength as a business, is they have very few to no competitors right now. That could be changing. We see Apple jumping in. We see Netflix being in the streaming. Netflix being much more aggressive about kids' content.
It's
so that reality could change.
Though. I mean, Doug, do you think those platforms will be a real threat to YouTube?
I don't see things like Netflix as a real threat. I mean, I think when we talk about influencers, it's probably more on the Instagram side, whether it's sort of snackable content. So Instagram is focused obviously more on shorter form content, where YouTube is more longer form. I think that is probably more the threat than someone like a Netflix, which will be more professionally produced.